Curse of Strahd, Chapter 13, Part 15, The Amber Temple. The Amber Temple, I'll show you the map here, is a two-level dungeon crawl found within Barovia. And I recommend this be the penultimate location that your player characters go to while exploring Barovia. Of course, you could be one of those DMs that just lets the player characters come here early and then have them take some severe damage or lose a friend here who maybe becomes undead later. Just an idea. Here's the second level, by the way. You arrive on the first level, and you may note these stairs. It descends down to the bottom level. Like many of the dungeon locations in Barovia, especially the complex ones, there are some unusual aspects to the layout of this place. For example, this back area here is kind of difficult to get into depending on how secret these secret doors are. Now, if your player characters, for example, if you come in and they're very perceptive, these secret doors might be fairly easy to detect. The set DCs for these secret doors, I mean, there's nothing in the chapter about what the DC is, but you could say that they range and slowly progress in difficulty in finding them, or just make them DC 15 or something like that. But I personally would make some more difficult to spot than others, since it is kind of open to the DM in this case. Now, again, you may note there are all these different chambers here. These are specific tombs, which I'll bring up later. There are quite a few of them. They're the main purpose of the temple. Essentially, the temple was built by a group of good aligned wizards 2,000 years ago when Barovia was part of a standard campaign world, although it never explains where Barovia used to be. Essentially, the sarcophagi or the crypts within the Amber Temple, which are buried in amber, house dark, evil entities that have been banished there to trap them and also secure their knowledge just in case they are needed in some point in the future. It's also extremely cold in this environment. It's negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, you could be using Celsius, then it's negative 23 degrees Celsius. And as a result, if the player characters do not have some sort of cold weather gear as they enter here, or say a magic ring that keeps them warm, they're going to have to deal with extreme cold weather, such as making constitution saves after every hour of being in here, or take points of exhaustion. Definitely enforce rules like this, by the way, if your player characters have arrived without this type of gear. There's also a lich, although he's heavily weakened, named Exanthor, who is more or less an ally of Strahd, who has some of his abilities missing and actually has way less hit points than typical liches. He's worth a lot less XP as a result, and he has no memorized spells. He is a very weakened lich who is lingering around in the dungeon and can be encountered. And he's essentially forgetful due to his extreme age and all that. And, he's likely to be encountered along with his phylactery, which is in my opinion, one of the flaws of this adventure, which I'll get to. Now, you do get the temple facade, and people have done some illustrations of the facade. It's kind of detailed. It's near like a pass, by the way, on the map of Barovia. You get some just random chambers and all that. The standard guard posts with arrow slots with secret doors. This is kind of found in a lot of different adventures, and in my opinion, is kind of overdone. There is a wand of secrets being clutched by a dead wizard who literally froze to death, although why the adventure doesn't say. Although his apprentice is still active in the dungeon, you'll get to him. His name's Vilnius, and empty barracks and things like that are found here, and other kind of standard chambers. The interesting thing is when the player characters get to X5, which is a two-level location. This is the X4 is the balcony. They can go downstairs. There's this huge statue with an open cowl that's empty, depicting a anonymous god of secrets, which the DM can just assign to a specific god of a specific realm if you want. It's up to it's left vaguely open. But there's a hollow slot there, and there's a secret door on the back of the statue's head to access it, although it's accessible from the front as well. And there is an arcana lock lingering within that cow. You'll note that there's also a lot of broken items, such as this broken wall here, a broken statue here within this dungeon crawl. This area over here has collapsed at some point and is well, badly damaged. And you may note as well up here, there's also part of that same collapse, which is a nice little touch when it comes to the design of the Amber Temple and how this location has changed in the last 2,000 years since it's been built. There is also this little crevice here which accesses this back chamber that has been taken over by a group of berserkers and a gladiator, and there's also a direwolf there. Although, note how the direwolf got into this tiny chamber with this itty bitty entrance is very questionable. Also, there's a secret door here leading to X16, which I'll get to shortly. This is one of those areas where maybe it could squeeze through this passage with enough time, but direwolves are large creatures. This would be very weird for that creature to be able to get in here, unless it somehow came in through the main entrance, which is a whole nother thing. Now, as you're going in here, and the player characters will likely have to deal with this Arcanoloth, who will throw spells at them depending on what version you want to use. There's also some flame skulls lingering around the area. And again, depending on what version of 5e you're using, they're going to have fireballs almost certainly. And depending on if you're using 2014 or 2024, they might have the shield spell. They will have magic missiles as well, though. They can be very dangerous. Now, the God of Secrets is again where the Arcanoloth is layering, and you do get some treasure with him, considering he has a robe of useful items. And again, this is an item that is useful, but not overpowered, which is great. Arcanoloth is a dangerous foe, and the player characters won't know he's there, hopefully. And there's some very interesting things in here, including a scroll of Moonbeam within that particular robe, and other things. And there's lots of secret doors. Again, this place is full of secret doors. It doesn't give you a set DC for the secret doors. I'm not a fan of the DCs being extremely low for secret doors. Actually, I think in this case it does actually say it's DC 20, but they don't all say that, the DCs in this adventure. But this is actually kind of difficult to find. And in my opinion, a temple like this, if the secret doors are very easy to find, or there are treasure items that are super easy to find, then why would they still be there unless they were put there very recently? Again, this is my critique for this adventure, and you'll note that there's some things in this adventure that don't make that much sense in this regard. In this case, the DC is 20 to find the secret door at the X5B location, which it's in here somewhere. It might be downstairs, actually. X5B, oh, it's the back area over here, the back of the statue, I believe. In any case, you have all these interesting hidden things here in this adventure. Now, again, I won't go into everything, but as the player characters are exploring, you do encounter Vilnius, who is badly burned, and he is the mage apprentice of the dead wizard the player characters found the corpse of later or earlier, and his Quasit, who apparently has wings in this case. I don't believe Quasits have wings in the in 2024, but I guess this one does. Let's just see here. Yeah, his speed is 40 feet. I'm guessing they're giving him wings in this case, because that looks like a wing at least. They used to have wings in earlier editions, but I guess he also is invisible. That's a thing. I guess he can turn invisible. But this mage is not meant to be an immediate threat. He is more or less living here, and he, I assume, has some ability, like cold weather vestments, to stay warm here. He knows some things about the dungeon as he's been here a while, at least for a day or two, and he can give them. He's a person that player characters can work with. Perhaps he can temporarily join their party, although I doubt they would trust him, as he is a scheming wizard who has his own agenda, and he's definitely evil. But he could also be someone the player characters may have some connection with, or maybe looking for, who say they heard about while they're in Valaki, and they've been wondering what happened to him after he disappeared a few days before, or something like that. Now, his master is, of course, dead, and you might have to explain why he died, or have a backstory of, other than the cold, what actually killed his master. Note that this guy is a mage, so he is a challenge rating 6 creature. This implies that his master must have been a higher level than he was, most likely, being that this guy is well, according to this, a fairly high level caster, as he can cast Cold of Cold and Fly. What would have killed his master other than cold? I would imagine it may be a Cone of Cold or something very dangerous that could cast Cone of Cold, like maybe the Arcanoloth, if he can cast Cone of Cold. Nonetheless, as we go through later in the adventure, this guy might help them. He has the amulet for the Shield Guardian here, which maybe he doesn't tell them he has it, and it'd be more interesting if the player characters find the Shield Guardian with him, and then he activates it and uses it to protect himself, rather than the player character just ending up with a Shield Guardian, which is a very overpowered magic item in any edition of D&D. It's essentially, they don't require concentration, and you just have to wear the amulet, which is fairly overpowered, considering this creature is very, very dangerous and can regenerate and do all these other things. But I digress. As you go later into the adventure in this location, you do get a bunch of amber golems. These are basically reskinned clay golems, sort of, or not as much clay golems, but they're similar, or stone golems, slightly different. Basically, they aren't that much different. They punch things and have a slow effect, effectively. And you go further in, one of them's slightly damaged when they first encounter it. There's like there are two or three of them in here. You get the Southwest Annex, which I noted earlier, with the Gladiator and Berserkers who have an access to the outside. Again, a dire wolf, which inexplicably is in this location. I feel like this is a serious error on the part of the designers of not thinking about how a direwolf got in there into such a small location to begin with, unless it was raised in there and never left. And then why would the doors not be locked? Note that the doors on both sides are not locked and not barred. Shouldn't they be? There are flame skulls roaming around the area and an Arcanoloth, which begs a lot of questions, which the designers should have thought about. As you go further into the adventure, there's some neat stuff. There's an old potion storage area. There's the room for the architect, and there's a model castle for the castle Ravenloft. This is one of the locations where one of the treasures could be found. One issue I have here is this wooden chest here has a false bottom, and in the bottom, with a DC 10 perception check, is a Tome of Understanding. Now, DC 10, everyone will notice. This is meant for the player characters to find. This is the equivalent of just a board on the bottom that is clearly obvious. But to have a Tome of Understanding, which is one of the most in demand, expensive items, magic items in the game, be found there is extremely overpowered and honestly kind of broken. I would switch this out. In fact, when I ran this adventure, I moved the Tome of Understanding to a different location. I think I hit it somewhere with one of these secret lich areas and put a false tome in there with a glyph of warding on it and some clever writing that it's like, it said something like explosion when they opened the page, and then it exploded. But I wouldn't make such a overly powered in-demand item so accessible, unless you want to really mess with your player characters and say that it's been read. Like, say the book was read 2 days ago by Vilnius. Now, the item would still be quite valuable, although it would have far less value to any player characters, as it would need to be recharged within the next, 100 years. But nonetheless, kind of an overpowered item that's way too easy to find in this location. So why wasn't it found earlier? Is the big question. As the player characters are not the first people to have ever come to this location. Now, as you go further in, again, you get more annexes, balconies, things like that, different shrines. These are fun little locations. There's an antipathy sympathy spell that will draw the player characters near this obsidian statue, and some little traps and stuff here and there. There's an iron chest on a ceiling held by sovereign glue, and some other stuff like that. There's some other little things. There's the Lich's lair, as you will maybe find. Now, I'll note it's again hidden behind various secret doors, and I don't believe it actually says what the DC to find these secret doors are, so you might have to assign them. Again, I would make them more and more difficult for each case to locate. Like, start them at 15, make the next one 20, the next one 25 if you want, and like this one could be 15, this one could be 20, these two would be 25, maybe the last one's even 30. It depends on what you want to do, but don't make them easy to find, especially if there's a really, really good treasure behind it or anything like that. Or even put some terrible thing behind one of those secret doors. That's a big surprise. I think I put a death tyrant behind one of them or a zombie beholder that was just trapped in there. Surprise. But then there's Exanthor, the lesser lich the player characters can fight. And then eventually, technically, you get the lower level. Although I'll note the central area of the lower level is really just part of X5, which is the main part of the dungeon in general from above. If we go down here, and then you get the catacomb chambers, which kind of connect off from the main chamber. I believe they're off I think they're off the south end here. Yeah, they're down here with all these different little catacombs that are little, corpses are kept there. And then finally, you get to the whole reason the temple exists to begin with, the amber sarcophagi. Essentially, rough blocks of solid amber, 8 feet tall, 5 feet wide, 5 feet thick. Trapped within them is a wisp of utter darkness, no more than a few inches long. They are the remains of dead and hateful gods or entities of dark power which are trapped here, which may have originated in different realms of existence, including maybe other domains of dread or other such places, and they each will potentially bestow a dark gift. This location and these crypts are mostly sealed. Of course, it begs the question after 2,000 years, why are they all still sealed? Shouldn't some of them be, more of them be broken open? Shouldn't all of them be broken open at this point? You would think with adventures player characters, they would literally break open every single door, unlike this one, which is broken open by itself, or this one is broken open. Player characters will open every single door they can. And some other group probably should have done this within the last 2,000 years. So there's got to be a reason why they are still sealed or have been resealed. This is part of adventure design that I question whether the designers of this adventure even thought about. Now, it's interesting is each one of these, well, crypts or sarcophagi has a different entity that can bequest a different ability, and it's kind of like a nice little ability that might last 3 times or might last a week or a 10 day before going away, except for the more powerful abilities. In this case, I'll just Thekri, the Queen of Poxes, gives the contagion spell 3 times, and then there's some after effects for these abilities, most of which aren't really that overpowered because they only last so long and they can only be used so many times. Now, each time the player characters accept one of these gifts, they must make a DC 12 charisma save or become evil, which, if they're not evil already, and then the adventure recommends the DM taking control of the character. I would not do that, by the way. I feel like that's taking agency away from the player characters, like all their agency. But making them evil is sort of a consequence for accepting various dark gifts and all that. Some of these gifts have some physical changes that they will make to the player characters, but there's no limit to how many of these gifts the player characters basically get. Now, one criticism I have for this adventure is most of the creatures encountered in this adventure do not have access to the dark gifts. Like the Arcanoloth does not have any dark gifts. But honestly, he probably should have some of these gifts. He's been here a while. He probably should have a few of them, or if he picked them up recently, that is, or maybe he just has one or two left over, or it could be that some other entity that's lingering around down here has some of the dark gifts. There's a Slade at one point, I believe, that maybe it has a dark gift or several of them, and it makes them more interesting and a bit more dangerous if they have accepted these dark gifts and how it might affect them. Now, I'm not going to read every one of them as they're all very different. Some of them can allow, the ability to raise dead. This one can cast mind blank. There's a whole bunch of different things. And, I kind of question where these creatures came from, which is actually very interesting. and kind of adds to a little bit of world building as to, where did Terra Chemamides come from? Probably some Greek themed world, as it sounds vaguely Greek. The grave worm, this guy, he's kind of interesting. This is one of the more interesting one where if the player characters take this gift, they must eat bones or grave dirt to survive, or they can die if they take this gift. But they get skeletal wings, which is really awesome if they take this gift. Two of my player characters took this gift because why not? You know. And there are lots of other gifts. I mean, they're just varied. They grant again different abilities, as I said, and this for a group of power gamers in D&D, which the designers would acknowledge exists way more often than it does. This is a smorgasbord of free, overpowered abilities in many cases. So the DM should be very wary upon getting to this part of the chapter or this part of the adventure, as player characters that will want to dive in and accept as much as possible really can do this without that much consequence. So as a DM, you might want to include additional consequences, like something in case for every gift they take, it's not just a chance of becoming evil, but maybe there's some sort of other form of corruption that could happen. Or maybe if they accept a second gift, they have to make another saving throw at a higher DC, which keeps going up, and they might get some form of madness that will potentially overtake the player characters, like permanent madness or until the gift ends type of permanent madness. Like if the gift ends in 10 days, for 10 days, they're absolutely catatonic which could be very difficult to remove. Otherwise, your player characters might go too far with these gifts and might take advantage of it. Again, a role playing group, this, which is, in my opinion, what this was more designed for, might be much more hesitant to accept dark gifts versus, say, a more power hungry group might be willing to take just about everything they can get their hands on, which several of the player characters in my group took almost everything they could. Not everything. They didn't know what everything was, and they took a lot of powerful gifts. Be wary about that. Anyways, you go to different locations here. Some of these are sealed. There are some Nothics in some of them, in some of these rooms, which why wouldn't they have some of these dark gifts? Again, that's another issue. There's the Death Slade, who I guess is potentially invisible at first. He's trapped in the vault of Harkotha, which is again one of the vaults. Um, it's you can read each dark gift to decide whether or not it would make sense for, say, the Death Slade to have access to that gift, or it would already have that. But why wouldn't he have, like, for example, these two gifts only last 10 days, so it makes sense if the Death Slade doesn't have these gifts. But some of the other chambers, maybe it does make sense for some of these creatures to have them. Or why is the Death Slade actually trapped in this room? And I noted this earlier. This place has been around for 2,000 years. So why is this particular room not or still sealed? Or has it been resealed recently by Strahd? The adventure doesn't say, but as a DM, you might want to think about a few things like that because the designers did not. Again, there's a whole bunch of these chambers. They're all over the place down here, and you can see one of them. One of the little sarcophagi has been destroyed, but you're dealing with, I don't know, 12 to 15 of these things, and there's a lot of them. And there's some other stuff which is not as important. There is the incapacitated shield guardian that player characters can get a hold of, and I think it'd be way more fun if the player characters came across it and it went berserk and just started attacking them. Surprise. And there is a poltergeist, which is a very weak undead, which is fine to have some weak undead along with some very powerful enemies here. And a treasury, which has been plundered with an amber golem again. And then I think there's another one that pops up. Yeah, here's the other one in the sealed treasury. The sealed treasury, I'll note, has a nice series of piles of treasure, which of course has a lot of copper pieces, which is a tremendous amount of copper pieces, which in D&D that is really just annoying when it comes to treasure. But some of this stuff is a little more valuable than others. Much of this has value but isn't worth a fortune. And a lot of silver and copper again, a lot of worthless stuff. This isn't overpowered, but one of the fortunes of Ravenloft might be located here. And again, we go into another one of these amber vaults. As for the ones that really matter, the Western Vault, the Dark Gift of the Vampire. This is really important is because this is how Strahd became a vampire, which is why the Amber Temple is important to begin with. If the player characters accept this gift and follow what needs to happen, the beneficiary dies a violent death at the hand of one or more creatures that hates it, and once they drink blood of a dead humanoid, they become a vampire. And I mean a actual vampire, not a vampire spawn. This is how Strahd and why Strahd is a vampire, which I'll get to in the next chapter, by the way, when I review Castle Ravenloft. There's this other location as well, the Dark Gift of Tenebrius. Hopefully, it's not Darth Tenebrius from Star Wars. Some people knew who he is, but actually, he's just some dark, incredible, evil entity who can grant the player characters the ability of how to create a phylactery and how to make the potion that turns one into a lich. This is incredibly powerful. This is how Exanthanar, or whatever his name is, the weakened lich, became a lich. It's very dangerous for player characters to have this information, but it can be really interesting if one of them becomes a lich. There's also this other one, the Dark Gift of Zudan, the Corpse Star, which isn't as crazy. They can, raise the ancient dead and do some stuff like that. It's not as absolutely insane. These are like the really more dark gifts and tombs and all that. But that's pretty much the entire adventure. It's sort of like part of the origin of Strahd, and it's interesting in a lot of ways. Although, again, I will note, and I did note that there are a couple of different flaws throughout the adventure itself, such as overpowered items that are way too easy to find, doors that should honestly be locked. Like these doors are locked, the crypt doors are locked, but why aren't the doors upstairs here where these guys are hiding locked from all these enemies? Yeah, that's a whole big thing. And just, things that should have been thought about, like why aren't all the crypts open? And if they were open before, are they still are they have they been resealed? I'm trying to say maybe they're sealed with sovereign glue now. Who knows? That's an idea. And why is there weird creatures in different rooms? It's a question some DMs should try to answer before running this adventure and all that. Now, lastly, is you get a couple of special events. Rahadin's Prayer. I like the name Rahadin, by the way. It kind of ties back to the Rahashi adventure, which is the first adventure that the Hickmans wrote before they wrote Castle Ravenloft, and they helped write this whole campaign as well. And Rahadin arrives on his phantom steed and to visit the temple and you know gets involved with the player characters and all that. There's another location, another individual, Casimir's Dark Gift. He is an individual, and I'll share his stats here. Again, he's another dusk elf who shows up and to accept the Dark Gift of Zudan, and then he wants to get the ability to raise the dead, and then wants to go to Castle Ravenloft to restore his centuries dead sister, Petrina Velikovna, from the dead, bring her back to life from the crypts of Castle Ravenloft. This is actually kind of a neat idea that I would maybe include. I'd actually use both, although it's just weird that they're both dusk elves. It seems kind of too much of a coincidence. Now, Rahadin is an evil dusk elf, so having him come in after the player characters have arrived is a kind of a surprise. And, surprise, here's a somewhat dangerous individual entity who's kind of a random encounter, but interesting nonetheless. He comes in. This guy's a little more interesting, as although he's not evil, he's neutral and he has an agenda, but he really is trying to help his dead sister again. And he's an elf, so I guess that's why he's lived so long. It's just odd that they're both dusk elves and all that. But it does give the player characters another reason to go to Castle Ravenloft, and also some extra muscle if they need it. Although, if the player characters went through this entire temple, they now have a shield guardian. And probably a higher intelligence or some other abilities from the magic items found within this adventure. Now, overall, because the Ember Temple has some serious flaws in what has been placed in it and the logic of how it works, I would rate it a 4 out of 5. I really want to rate it a 5 because it's such a really cool idea overall, but there's just some odd things that the designers didn't think about for the most part that they really should have. That just makes me feel like they didn't think about the design of this adventure very well, which I like to think the Hickmans designed this. It feels like a Tracy Hickman adventure, and the fact that the design of the dungeon is really unique and kind of reminds me of some other adventures like Rahashia. But there's just some odd things that don't feel as thought out as they should be, that more experienced DMs probably would have thought about ahead of time. And the not lack of limitations on the various amber tombs themselves, the sarcophagi, feels ripe to be overpowered and overused and taken advantage of, which can be a big issue in later on in the campaign. Granted, this could make a group of lower level player characters way more powerful and allow them to deal with Castle Ravenloft easier at the same time. Overall, though, the 4 out of 5 as the penultimate adventure in Curse of Strahd. Now, guys, if you like these reviews and you want to see more of them, like this video, subscribe for more content, check out my Patreon if you'd like, and let me know if you ever want to join a campaign. I do DM professionally, by the way. I DM quite a few campaigns a week. Otherwise, stay tuned for more content.